The Cyclops cave smelled like old cheese and sheep. Odysseus's men had already found it, helped themselves to the food inside, and were now actively begging him to take some cheese back to the ship and leave before the owner came home. That's what they wanted. Grab the supplies, go. Odysseus said no. He wanted to see what kind of host this cave dweller was, his exact reasoning in Homer's telling. He wanted to know, so they stayed. The Cyclops came home, rolled a stone the size of a building across the entrance, lit a fire, and then noticed the men huddled in the corner. He ate 2 of them immediately, then he slept. Odysseus's men wanted him to kill the Cyclops while it was sleeping, a reasonable idea, but Odysseus pointed out that only the Cyclops could move the boulder. So they were trapped because they'd stayed, and now they couldn't even solve the problem of being trapped. That's how the Odyssey starts, basically. Not the famous wooden horse, not the decade-long war, but Odysseus in a cave full of sheep and dead crew members, working out the consequences of his own curiosity. Odysseus does get out, of course. He blinds the Cyclops with a sharpened stake hardened in the fire, a very satisfying plan, genuinely well executed, and escapes under the bellies of the sheep when the Cyclops lets them out to graze in the morning. Classic. The men get to the ships. They row, and then Odysseus does something baffling. He shouts back at the Cyclops. He tells him his real name, Odysseus of Ithaca, son of Lairesse. Not the fake name he'd used in the cave. He'd called himself Nobody, which was actually clever, but his actual full findable name. His men beg him to stop. He shouts it again. Now, there are a couple of ways to read this. You can say it's pride, which is how most people read it. But in Homer, the word used is closer to grief than arrogance. He's furious, actually, at what the Cyclops took from him. In fact, that's the rest of the poem, more or less, what the Cyclops does with that name. He's the son of Poseidon. He calls out to his father and asks him to curse Odysseus by name, to make his journey home long, painful and lonely. Poseidon hears. Odysseus gave the sea god a name to curse. The Odyssey has something like a pattern after that. The men want to leave. Odysseus wants to see what happens next. Circe's island is a good example. The men get turned into pigs. Everyone knows that bit. But after Odysseus confronts Circe directly and she restores them, something shifts. She becomes genuinely helpful. She warns him about the Sirens, about Scylla and Charybdis, about the cattle of the sun god Helios on Thrinacia. Don't touch them, she says, of all things, the cattle. All of this turns out to be accurate. But here's the thing, and it's easy to miss because Homer buries it in a single line. They stay on Circe's island for a full year before any of that happens. A year. It's only after that year that Odysseus' men finally come to him and say, essentially, we would like to go home now. He listens. He goes to Circe and says it's time. She agrees, starts giving him the instructions. But there's a question the text doesn't quite answer. Why a year? The men were restored in a day. The winds were favourable enough when they eventually left. Circe wasn't keeping them there. Homer is actually pretty clear on that. So what was? Then there's Calypso. This one is harder to explain away. After losing his last ship and all his remaining men in a storm, Odysseus washes up on the island of Ogygia, the island of the nymph Calypso, and she offers him immortality. Actual immortality. Eternal life, no aging, no death, permanent residence on a pleasant island with someone who clearly loves him. He says no. He tells her he wants to go home to Penelope, who is mortal, who ages, who will die. Homer gives him a whole speech about why a mortal woman he loves is better than an immortal life. And you want to know what I think? I believe it. I think he means it, more or less. But he stays 7 years. 7. Calypso doesn't imprison him. Homer is specific about this. It's just that he doesn't leave. He sits on the rocks every day, looking toward the sea, weeping, which is a strange thing to do for 7 years when you own a raft's worth of timber. The gods eventually intervene. Hermes arrives with a direct order from Zeus. Let him go. Calypso is furious, and only then does Odysseus build the raft. The Sirens are worth a moment, because Homer gives us something there that I find more revealing than anywhere else. You know the setup, crew's ears plugged with wax. Odysseus tied to the mast. He can hear the song but can't move. Now, the Sirens' actual offer in Homer is interesting. They're not promising pleasure, they're promising knowledge. They say they know everything that happened at Troy, everything that happens on the earth. All of it. And Odysseus strains against the ropes. He signals frantically to be untied. They row harder. The common reading is temptation, danger of beauty. But the Sirens aren't offering beauty, they're offering information. And Odysseus, who has sailed for a decade, who has fought a war, who has watched all his men die, his instinct when someone offers to tell him everything is to try to get off the boat. It's actually not that different from the Cyclops cave. He stayed to see what kind of host was coming. He wanted to know. Homer seems to think this is Odysseus' core quality. Not cleverness, not endurance, the need to know what's there. He makes it back to Ithaca, in disguise, in stages, dropped off unconscious by the Phaeacians on a beach he doesn't immediately recognize. Penelope has held off a haul full of suitors for years by promising to choose one after she finishes weaving a burial shroud for Laertes. She unravels it every night, buys herself 3 years that way before someone notices. The suitors have been eating through Odysseus' livestock and wine for years, threatening his son Telemachus, a few of them planning murder. The violence at the end is somewhat justified, and Homer frames it that way. Odysseus in disguise as a beggar, the contest of the bow, the suitors can't string it, Odysseus strings it easily, then the killing. What I find strange is what comes immediately after. Penelope doesn't recognize him. She tests him, asks the old nurse Euryclea to move the bed Odysseus built himself, with a living olive tree as one of the posts. He knows it can't be moved. That's how she knows. They've been apart for 20 years, and the scene is quiet in Homer, no speeches. They lie down together and then Athena holds back the dawn. A small miracle, more time. Homer ends the Odyssey with Odysseus back on Ithaca. The suitors are dead, the hall is cleaned up, Penelope knows who he is. And then the poem ends, but there's a prophecy buried earlier that most retellings leave out. Back in the underworld, the ghost of Tiresias told Odysseus what comes after home. Take an oar, he said, and walk inland. Keep walking until you find people who don't know what an oar is, who mistake it for a grain winnowing fan. Plant the oar in the ground, make an offering to Poseidon. Only then will you have peace. So the poem ends, but Odysseus hasn't finished. He's already been told his next destination. The man who spent 7 years with Calypso not building a raft, who stayed a year with Circe before his men had to ask to leave, who strapped himself to a mast to hear a song about knowing everything. That man still has one more journey. Away from the sea, into land where nobody knows what the sea is. And whether that sounds like punishment to you, or relief, or the one thing that could actually hold his attention, Homer doesn't say.